This is actually a talk I gave last week. My wife had approached me and said a lot of people have a lot of questions just in terms of things that are going on. And I always kind of give a caveat. This is not meant to be the be-all and end-all. You know, this is just kind of my view, my take on a lot of these things, very informational. In fact, I'll say a whole bunch of things and then we'll really open it for questions, because I think that's really what people have. And I think that the whole world is scratching its head now, certainly the Jewish community. I just anecdotally, I've told a lot of people the amount of uptick in traffic that we're seeing at Aish in terms of social media, in terms of Aish.com, all those pieces from Jews, really, and liberal Jews that are disconnected, has really been amazing to see. We even had an article recently last week written by a Jew that was a self-defined unaffiliated Jew that really was not really connected to the community, but writing how thrown they were. And I think I mentioned last week, last Shabbat lunch, we were with someone who's a member of the Screen Actors Guild, the SAG, and he was telling me that they had started for like a dozen kind of frum Jewish guys in Hollywood, like a WhatsApp group about everything going on. He said they're now up to like 600 people, and many of them are liberal Jews who are just totally thrown by what's going on. And I think this is very, very different for a lot of reasons, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. I'd like to start with the Dvar Torah, which some of you have heard me say last week or in the past, but I do think it's important to start with just a few words of Torah. We'll get into some of the details and then obviously open up for any questions anyone may have. And that is that in Parshas Noach, in the Torah portion with Noah, so at the very end there's a story of Migdal Bavel, which is the Tower of Babel. And you know, they get together and they create this tower to attack God. It's a very, very famous story. And right in the beginning, when they're talking about that, there's a word that uses there called achadim, right? Achdus, right? It comes from the word achdus, to unity, right? This whole unity Shabbaton, they were unified. And I always point out that, you know, as growing up in the Jewish community, I was always told that if we could only have unity, then everything would be solved. Like, that's our biggest issue. If we come together, everything else will work itself out. But here, they had unity, and the whole thing was a disaster, right? They tried to attack God, and God spread them out, different languages, everything that ensues. So, a couple years ago, and some of you know this about me, I used to hang out in Camp Dina, my wife's camp. She was there for many years. And I would get all these kind of eclectic books to read over the summer. Because, you know, she was like working and on the weekends I would hang out. And there was one time I ordered a bunch of books, and Aryeh, my son, you guys know Aryeh, he opens the box from Amazon. He's like, we're totally on an NSA watch list now, right? and the books were, first was Art of War. That was just one of them, right? But the second two books were pretty intense. One was a Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. And the other one was Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler, יימח שמו, right? And the reason I got these books and I wanted to read them was so many people quote from them, so many people talk about them, very few people actually read them. And actually, I had to take the books out of Camp Dina. My wife made me. Then I had to take it out of the house. So I actually have the only copy of Mein Kampf in the old city of Jerusalem. It's sitting in my office because that's the only place I was allowed to have it. And the two books are very, very different from each other. You know, you read the Communist Manifesto, you feel like you're being screamed at the entire book. Like, you know, all the problems with the wealthy, and, you know, we have to kind of create one man, one vote, come together, all those pieces. And then you read Mein Kampf, and it's a scary book because it's so seductive. You know, I wanted to like the Jews, I felt bad for the Jews, I wanted to understand the Jews, and then slowly you get led down a pathway to where we're the biggest evil in the world. And the reason I wanted to read these two books was these two books were responsible for more deaths in the history of the world than any other two books. Between Communist Russia and Nazi Germany, they literally killed millions of people, Stalin and Hitler. And what I came to realize was these two societies also had tremendous achdus. They were together. Nazi Germany, they were in lockstep, literally, you know, just following orders. We're together. Communist Russia was the same thing. But I realized that when you have unity that's based on hate, it doesn't last. It can't last. Right? And eventually they crumbled. They took millions of people, you know, they killed millions of people along the way, but eventually they crumbled. Abraham looks at this Migdal Bavel, right? This tower that's built on hate of God. Right? He sees the way the world is going, and he decides that he is going to build a religion of love. He is going to build a religion that is focused on what I love. I love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I love God. I love this. I want to spread these values all around the world. And frankly, he's very successful, not just with the Jews, but in terms of bringing monotheism to the entire world. And I think what this conflict is really showing and bringing out is the various ways, we're being bombarded by this hate, which is really, I think, what is throwing so many people. I think we all kind of suspected it, but now no one's hiding it, right? And we're seeing it everywhere, constantly in the streets, and people are very, very, very thrown by that. But yet in Israel, the amount of love that people are having for each other, and so many people keep alluding to it, the massive amounts of story and love and coming together and support is really unbelievable. It's really amazing. And I think to me, that's really framed this conflict. That's really framed this conflict. In terms of this, one of the things you're hearing a lot of from people is, the difference between being a Palestinian and part of Hamas. And what's interesting is when you talk to a lot of the government officials there and stuff, they don't differentiate in that same way. Right? Many of the Palestinians are being taught, young people are being taught that we are the enemy. They're being taught. And so when you have a kid that's being brought up in that atmosphere, where in classes being told that we're the enemy and we have to be a martyr, and then you have, I don't know if any of you know, he actually lives nearby here, Sander Gerber. Sander Gerber is a good friend, great friend of Aish, really amazing person. So he pushed the Taylor Force Act, right? If people here have heard of the Taylor Force Act, Taylor Force Act is, I think, one of the greatest pieces of legislation out there, right? And what he did was he decided that he found out the Palestinians are paying, right? And this is the PA, and this is not Hamas, right? The PA is paying families whose dependent, their relatives, go out and blow themselves up or kill people or killed as martyrs. They were paying them money. He's like, this is ridiculous. So he goes out and he wants to stop it. So the first thing he has to do, he has to resign from some very official boards of pro-Israel organizations that were not comfortable with where he was going, right? Which shows you he was probably onto something. And so he goes out and he says, this is crazy. And then Taylor Force was not Jewish, was in Tel Aviv. He had been a veteran of the U.S. Military, and he was killed in a terrorist attack. And he goes to the family and says, I'd like to pass this legislation to stop this insanity. And they get on board. They're amazing people. And he passes legislation that America will hold back money, right? Whatever money the PA has given these terrorist families, we're not going to give it to you. And it was such an important legislation. He did the same thing in Israel. It's a whole other thing in terms of that, another conversation. But it's so important to understand that as we're phrasing this Hamas, and people are trying to be PC, quote unquote, right? That, this is Hamas versus Palestinian people. It's much, much larger than Hamas. Much larger than Hamas. And I think people need to know that. One of the things that I've said on air in different interviews over the years, especially with Gaza, is we pulled out of Gaza. People don't even realize that. We pulled out of Gaza, So then, they use the language of, and you've probably heard this, open air prison, right? That's what Gaza, an open air prison, Well, but there's another border that they have with Egypt, right? But General Sisi is no way, and I don't know if you're watching Egypt. Everyone's trying to pressure Egypt to take in refugees, and Egypt is saying, absolutely not, right? Now, they're saying because it's not right, is their home, right? But really, he doesn't want them. Right? He understands what they bring to that table and all those different pieces. And a lot of these, Jordan is the same way. So, it's very interesting. I went to Egypt a couple of months ago. I went on a trip. Shalom, who is here, and I are members of something called YPO. YPO is a network for CEOs. And it's an international network. And within the network, right, there's something, a group that they create called Mosaic. Right, they're basically CEOs that are pro-Israel. It's like 300 of us. My wife's on the WhatsApp group, right? She loves it. They're like amazing people doing it. So we went to Egypt together. And when you're in Egypt, it is really amazing how what they tell you has no relationship to the truth. Right? It was just hearing it firsthand. We went to the local synagogue there. Right now, just to give you statistics on Egypt, Egypt had over 100,000 Jews in 1948, right? Now, it could have been 125, whatever, but over 100,000 Jews in 1948. Today, they have somewhere between 30 and 40 Jews. That's 30 to 40 Jews, not 30, 40. That's 30 to 40 Jews left. We happened to meet the head of the Jewish community, a very nice woman. There's a whole other story I could tell you another time, but she had not heard shofar in a long time. I wound up blowing shofar for her. It was a very moving moment. But if you start to look into what happened? In the 1950s, Egypt took all the Jewish males, threw them in prison. and said, we're happy to let you out, but you got to get out of the country, right? So overnight, the population dropped down. And then, you hear, President Sisi say, like, we're not sure, the Jews had it great here, we're not sure where they all went, right? It's such a disconnect, right? And you have to understand that that is the way the Middle East plays out. It's very hard for us in the West to understand that. I always give the example, we have Arabs that work at Aish, and I have nice relations with some of them. And one of the guys was once in my office, I'll never forget this, and he's explaining to me, he's like, look, I need time off, my daughter, she needs eye surgery, she has to go here, he's giving me a whole, I get to him, I'm like, you don't have a daughter. They go, oh, and then it's just very different than the way we do things. There's a certain way, like it's a bazaar, like in terms of like the shuk, like everything is, and the way they deal with things, the way they say things, things are very, very off, right? And that's why, with the hospital bombing that we got blamed for, right? It was just, running around the world. What did Mark Twain say, right? He said a lie is around the world by the time the truth has time to put on its pants, or something like that. But that's really, I think, a lot of these things. And I think also, what's different now, for sure, is the battle online. A lot of people have come up to me, even over this weekend, talk about the rallies and going to the rallies, etc. So much of the battle right now is online, and it's a very difficult battle. I was very friendly with the Gilad Erdogan at the UN. We're very blessed. 3 or 4 times a year, Gilad he's an ambassador to the UN, and Danny Danon before him. They bring ambassadors to Israel. They bring a lot of from Africa, from other smaller countries. And at Aish, we always host them for dinner or lunch, cocktails on the roof. We're very, very close to them. And so we were at a meeting with Gilad Erdogan, and this, of course, goes back to Durban. There was a Durban conference, right, where BDS really took hold. That's really where the first inkling of BDS. One of the things that you have to know just in general, right, this talk is about Israel, not anti-Semitism, but it's very important to understand with anti-Semitism, it's very hard to just say, I hate Jews, right? You're out in the open, you're just saying it, right? So basically, many times, anti-Semites hide behind social causes. Right? So, for example, the example I always give is in Germany when they tried to ban bris milah. So I spent a lot of time in Germany when I worked for NCSY. I was there working with their youth groups, and I'm in Germany, and we were going to have it was a Chag HaSmicha. They were ordaining rabbis in Germany. It's a fairly emotional thing to see that there are rabbis back there and Torah being taught. And right before we came to Cologne for the ceremony, they had announced, one of the judges there announced that they were banning circumcision because of the pain to the baby, And it was this whole big uproar, and, we wound up speaking about it. But I was sitting at a dinner. There was a dinner given by Ronald Lauder the night before. We were sitting at dinner. I was with a guy named Stefan Kramer, right? Stefan Kramer was the Jewish head of the Jewish community, right? Meaning there's no separation of church and state. So a lot of places in Europe, there's an official governmental kind of head of your community, right? So I was sitting with Stefan Kramer. I had known him for many, many trips. And I said to him, I just asked the obvious question, is this thing with circumcision, is this anti-Semitism? Or is this like really they feel really bad about the baby or what have you? And he said to me, Steve, he goes, look, when you have a guy with a shaved head and a swastika tattoo talking about the pain to the baby, it's very hard to take. Like, that's anti-Semitism. And you find it by shechita in many places in Europe. They hide behind something. And BDS has become the largest thing to hide behind, right? I don't have a problem with Jews. I love Jews, but it's Israel, right? Israel, attack Israel, etc. So we were having a meeting at the UN with Gilad, with a bunch of Jewish leaders in the room, and we were talking about, it was the anniversary, I think 20th anniversary, whatever it was, of the Durban conference. How are we going to kind of push back, etc. So there had just been another conflict in Gaza at that time, right before then. So I was like the first hand up when we were going around. And I said, look, honestly, we got totally beat on social media on this last conflict. And that is where the entire world is on social media. And we got beat by the other side. It's a huge problem. So, I said my piece about social media, and that was when Aish was starting to really, really pick up in social media. And the next guy to go was Rick Jacobs, right? Rick Jacobs is the head of the Reform movement, right? So Rick Jacobs, he starts out by saying, I want to disagree with Rabbi Burg from Aish, right? I'm like, okay, He's like, Rabbi Burg said that we lost. He said, we didn't lose. We didn't show up to play. And he starts making my point so much stronger than I ever could, the fact that we have absolutely failed online. And it's very, very serious because, look, we're of a certain age. I'll be the first to admit, I don't have TikTok and, there's things on my phone, right? But the average person is getting their news from TikTok, they're getting it from Instagram, they're searching for information there, all the news comes from there, and the algorithms just basically keep giving you the stuff that they think you want to see because they want to keep you on. They are not interested in giving you any other viewpoint, because if you hear something that you don't like, you will go someplace else. So there's this echo chamber, right? And for the Palestinians and the other cause, they have really mastered it. And that's a huge issue for us. So we talk about like going to the rallies, et cetera. There's this massive cyber rally that we're not really onto as much as we should be. I think this was also very different for us, because of, first of all, the failure of the IDF. You can put that aside, and the truth is, everyone in Israel has put that aside. The head of military intelligence has said we blew it. The head of the military said we blew it. The head of Shin Bet, right? Bibi maybe at some point might say that, but that's not happening in the near future, right? But the bottom line is everyone said that there was a failure here, but we can't deal with it now. We have to deal with it later, and it's a very fair point, and everyone is on that point. But what was different here was this breach was the brutal killing, right? The rapes and the killing of babies and children, all these things, which is something that should have shaken the core of the entire world, right? And what we saw coming out of it, we were all shook up. I do not know a Jew that wasn't shook up by what happened. We were in Israel at the time. We were there on Shabbos at Aish. We started hearing all things happening. It happened to be one of my nephews walks in. This is Jerusalem from Rabbi Shemesh. He had come to join his unit to go up there. So he stopped by to see us on the way, and we were shaken by our core. And then we realized that the world just had a playbook ready to go, right? And they didn't even pause to think of whether this was different or not. They just had a playbook, and they rolled it out. And so we were so thrown, and thankfully a lot of other non-Jews were thrown. They were really thrown by seeing what was going on. Anyone that had any intelligence whatsoever and was watching people come out on the campuses, and again, I want to thank the Magermans for their brave stance, I think, in terms of the campuses. We've been watching this intersectionality for a long time. I heard that word for the first time many years ago, and what it really means is, and a lot of us have been thrown in the past, intersectionality is really when you have all the liberal causes come to, hey, I'm going to support you, you're going to support me, we're together against the big man, right? And so many Jews were thrown when years ago you go to a Black Life Matters rally and you see Palestine, free Palestine. Everyone's like, what does one thing have to do with the other, right? Intersectionality, they have been coming together on campus for a long time. And so on campus, right, where you should have people that are intelligent, the way they came out so forcefully with zero facts, zero caring, right, and the fact that I was telling someone Haaretz, right, and Haaretz is a fairly liberal newspaper, but they had an op-ed about people ripping down, these signs of hostages. These are hostages. They're like being held, children, everything, and people are ripping down all over. Like even Haaretz is like, it's too much. Now, I was in the room with my wife. My wife was showing me this video. You got to love Jews, right? Because there's a video of how to put these signs up, but put baby oil and Vaseline on them. We're just, it's just such a Yiddish cup, We're like, well, okay, right? And but it's crazy. It's really insane, like nothing else in the world, And I have to say, just to get into kind of the global view, and this I'll just say, and feel free in the question and answer, you may agree or disagree. I think that President Biden has stepped up in a meaningful way. And I think we have to be careful because I went to an AIPAC. AIPAC has shifted a lot of what they do. Some people are pro, against it, whatever it is, but they shifted to starting to pour money into campaigns. And a guy got up and he said, 96% of the campaigns that we put money into, we won. He goes, but this is a Jewish room, and I know you're all thinking, who are the 4%, right? And I'm like, yeah, who are, right, because we're Jews. So even though we're like very much, all-inclusive, I think with Biden, to me, a very meaningful moment was when he was coming to Israel, and right then they had that whole farce with the hospital, right? Israel blew up a hospital, right? Turned out had nothing to do with us. It was a failed rocket, all those things. And Jordan, our peace buddies, right, had basically were supposed to host for this meeting, which I think is happening now with Blinken. With Arab countries, they canceled it, right? So it would have been very easy for him just to say, okay, let me wait to come, and he came to Israel, and then he went right back home. And I think that was very strong in terms of what they've done with the ships, sending over the fleet. They've taken a lot of moves, constant re-support. It's people in the military, they're very, very thankful of the moves America has made. And I think it's important to do it. And I say that, like, some of you know I'm on Newsmax, right? Newsmax is kind of to the right of, I don't know, Fox and anything else, right? And they're always kind of saying, I said, look, in this case, you have to really kind of recognize that, On the other hand, we have a Congress that we've never had Congress people that were outright anti-Semitic. We have people there literally, and it's like unprecedented. You literally have Congress people, we live in a time, who have no problem saying things way, way, way extreme, and we're battling that. It's not easy, and we have to hold on to our friends. The other thing just to mention, just in terms of what's going on there in the Middle East, I mean, to say it's complicated would be an understatement of the century. On the one hand, you have Syria, right? And thankfully, Israel has generally had a very good relationship with Russia over the years, because it's very complicated with Syria, with all the things going on there, etc. Ukraine has stressed that relationship, and now you're watching Russia and China kind of take that other position. So everyone's around there. Everyone has people down there. They're floating around. You have Iran lobbying things. Also, one of the things that changed from the last week when you heard this speech was Nasrallah spoke yesterday. I don't know if anyone picked up on his speech. Obviously it's hard to fully say, but it was very, very fascinating to hear his pitch, which was basically, we had no idea that this was happening. It was purely Hamas-Palestinian. Iran had no idea, right, that this was happening, but we support it, all right? It's very interesting. Now, you can read into that they're not necessarily looking to broaden the conflict, but it might broaden. We just don't know. I think that I suspect, right, and I'm not saying this based on conversation I've had, but this is not definitive, obviously, is that when they attacked from the south, there was an expectation that Israel would just immediately throw everything down south and go in, and then when everything was down south, they would start attacking from the north. Israel did not do that for many, many reasons. But I can tell you, and I think many people do know this, Israel has very significant forces in the north, right? They did not throw everything down south at all, right? And I say this, from having a conversation with people, but also I always mention my two nephews. One of them is the south, one of them is in the north. And both of them are where they need to be to make sure that these things don't happen. So when people try to say, well, how long is this going to take? When's this going to be over, et cetera? It's hard to say. If it's just Gaza, now they've encircled it, they have to do what they have to do. They have to get these hostages back. They're pushing hard. Right now, I mean, every time you turn on your phone, everyone's pushing for a ceasefire, which will give Hamas time to regroup and take the hostages God knows where. That would be a disaster for Israel. And I did not fully read the article. I was kind of flipping through as I was coming here. It did seem that at least what the news reports were, that Secretary of State Blinken was at odds with the Arab leaders, basically telling them that no, we don't think that's a good idea, which I'm thankful for, just to at least read that headline. But it's hard to say. If it stays in Gaza, and I think that they have to do this, and off the record, I've spoken to Israeli ministers who basically said that part of it is they are flattening Gaza, and they are very hopeful that the Gazans will go elsewhere, because it's not healthy to keep them there and this conflict, and that's something they would not be upset if that was a result of all of this. But you just don't know. You know what's happening north. Iran's in the background, who are just evil, horrible, wicked, terrible people. I mean, we have an Aish in Buenos Aires. I've been to Buenos Aires many times in my life, and I've gone to the Amia building, which is one of the buildings that was bombed by the Iranians in the 90s. It's going back to the 90s. The Iranian bombed, multiple sites in Buenos Aires, And you go there and you see the faces and you see what happened. Iran's been playing this game for a long time. And that's, what makes the whole thing even more tragic is you're listening to these college kids, who are like, in Iran, a woman doesn't, cover her face and she gets beaten to death, right? But Israel's the aggressor, and, it's just you feel like you're living in a crazy world. There's a Gemara, and I'll close with this and I'll take questions from anyone, if anyone has. But there's a question that says that a guy goes up to Shemaim, to heaven, and he comes back down, and they ask him, like, what was the difference between down here and upstairs? He says, Tachtonim elyonim, elyonim tachtonim. He said, what we think down here, right, is really big, upstairs is nothing. And what we think is nothing is really big. And so we're living in this Alice in Wonderland world where we're looking to the world going, are you kidding me? Like, someone just wrote recently they're about the proportional response. So we should go rape their women and kill their babies? Like what's proportional when you have madmen coming in to this extent? And and even I mentioned this last week when we were talking. The Hamas guys were drugged up. It's not so simple to just wreak havoc the way they did it. They literally took drugs to get them to a place to just do that. And it was just about going in and killing Jews. So the good news is, I'll finish on a good note, right? After all those pieces, is that if you speak to the folks in the army, in the Israeli army, the morale is so high. Armies are complicated places. You do this, you do that. You're always, I always joke with the army, it's always hurry up and wait and all these different pieces to it. They know exactly why they're doing what they're doing. And that is so important for our boys. And they're boys. You're talking 19, 20, 21. It's so important for them. And so they know what they have to do. The will, thank God, I think there's tremendous unity. You're hearing all these beautiful stories. More and more beautiful stories are happening. And I have seen this even in the country, even in spite of what we've gone through the last year, which was horrific in terms of the fighting in Israel. They are heading, I believe, in a direction. And I think part of our job is going to be to try to sustain that. Is really not to go back to the infighting, to really understand that we're blessed to have Israel. We're blessed to have Israel. And I mention this all the time. We're very involved in Aish with the government in Israel and the different people there. And I always tell them that, you want to push Israel, but you can't push Israel without Torah, right? We have to know where we come from in order to appreciate the land we're in. Danny Danone, I mentioned, was the previous UN ambassador. So Danny came one time, and I said to him, Dan, I couldn't believe it. He had gotten up in the UN with a Tanakh, with the Bible, right? And he said, I said, Danny, you brought Tanakh into the UN, He's the first he told me that all his friends in Israel started calling him Rabbi Danny. That's like his new nickname, But he said to me, he goes, this whole thing doesn't work without the Bible. Like, this is our right here. And I'll say the opposite, right? If I sit in a room of religious Jews, which is, you have to have a place to practice the Torah, and that's Israel. And it's very clear from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob on down to all the connections there. Israel is our home. We have to defend it, and it's where we are. And I tell people, when people are very nervous what's happening to Israel, I said, in my mind, the fact that we wandered the earth for 2,000 years and we came back to this, God did not bring us back to Israel to wipe us out. That's not why we're back there. We're back there to rebuild. We're back there to be strong. We're back there. I mean, that's our place. And so we, here in the diaspora and all around the world, have to defend ourselves. And I think the title of this was kind of like, what do you answer? I'm not sure there are answers that even work anymore. I think in the old days, you'd read a book of facts and you come in with facts. No one cares, right? If it's not 15 seconds on TikTok, no one's there anymore, So we have to really kind of look at things differently than we have before. We have to be steadfast in our belief that we're right, and we just need to move forward and support each other and the Jewish people. So, take questions. Yeah, David.
I want to bring two pieces of information which I think are really important for everyone to hear. First is social media. Israel is losing the social media war beyond what you know, because TikTok is lying about the statistics. It's 97% pro-Palestinian on TikTok. They claim it's 50-50 because they're ignoring the hashtags that matter. Mm-hmm. If you exclude Free Palestine, yes, everything's equal, but 95% of the support of Palestine is coming from the Free Palestine tag. And so all the attacks against TikTok, they're answering them, and they're hiding the fact that they're supporting Palestinians with their algorithms. And the other platforms also. It's a lot more valuable for them to support, to shift their algorithms to be anti-Israel, that gets them more money. The other thing is, in terms of the campus situation, which really goes to the anti-Semitism, there's a report coming up this week that $10 to $15 billion of undocumented money has gone into universities from foreign governments. The vast majority is coming from Middle Eastern sources. Well, it's coming from Qatar. It's coming from UK, which is a redirection of Middle Eastern money. It's coming from Canada, which is also a misdirection of Middle Eastern money. It's coming from the Emirates. It's coming from a lot of places. But basically, they're buying influence quietly. And the issue to me is not, of course they're trying to buy influence. The scary thing is that the universities are accepting it. And that shows the mission of these schools is to promote effectively anti-Semitism. The kinds of things that they're getting money to do, to skew their departments, to skew their faculty, to skew the campus conversation, that they're suppressing right-wing conversation and they're promoting left-wing conversation. It's statistically evident, this reports show, and that these campuses that receive Middle Eastern money have 3.5 times as many anti-Semitic acts on campus. And the effect goes to the communities around the universities. So the communities around them also have an increase in FBI-reported anti-Semitism. So this is something that it's not just Penn or some kind of like localized thing. This has been going on for 15 years, and it takes a long time to transform a faculty. And it's a mission of these schools that we have to understand that there's this hate that is being developed among our youth. The students are going to school and learning very deeply how to hate Jews, how to hate Israel. And I think we just need to just realize that we can't solve it with a task force or a commission at a university, that it's an embedded problem.
Totally. You're 1,000% correct on both those points. And the one of the things when I worked for the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and we would talk about lone wolves. That's like a big thing. Someone goes out and does something alone, the whole thing. There's no such thing as a lone wolf that hasn't spent enormous amounts of time online and been encouraged by things that so many people have said. And my wife sent me something right before I came here. It was another report about money, and I think Cornell was one of the largest ones, which we just had answered. So you're hearing this stuff on campus, and then someone decides to go out and make some threats. That's not coming from nowhere. The other thing I want to say is you're absolutely right about TikTok. It happens to be the Aish. And again, thank you for Jamie Geller once again, right? But we have spent the last 3 years really, really plugging away at, because I'll just say from our point of view, every single Jew in the world is on social media. So for us to contact and reach out to unaffiliated Jews to get them to connect Jewish wisdom, that's our space. But we've become very sophisticated, in fact, more sophisticated than I think almost anyone else out there. And we've been talking to the government about that because Israelis are absolutely horrible at explaining their case. They're just not built for it. What, everyone doesn't know we're right? No, we're not. We don't. Everyone's had that conversation, and I have that conversation with different ministers and stuff. And we've told them, we just met with the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. I just met with some of my people. We said, we're going to help you. We're going to help you. Give us information. We can help get it out there. And I think we all have to do that because we're getting beat bad. And TikTok is horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Yeah.
So there's a lot of organizations that are not Jewish in the States that are very, very pro-Israel, pro-Jew. So is there any efforts that we are making or could make to really get more allies on our side? Because this battle with Israel and Hamas is not a local one. This is an attack from the Islamo-fascist, leftist, BLM, Antifa, left woke on the Western world. So I think there's a bigger picture here also that we can't kind of forget about.
Yeah, there's a massive picture. The fact that, look, Hamas, people have made that point, it's ISIS. You're not talking about difference, just different names to these things, these different food groups. There are other groups that realize this. A lot of times, it's some of the more right-wing groups. And unfortunately, some of the liberal groups, because of the kind of their bent, they're not. And I'd love to try and do that a little better. The Christians have been pretty good. As a matter of fact, literally walking over here, I got involved with friendly with some of the Christian groups in Israel. They're doing full-page ads about praying for Israel and stuff, and they're having a whole group of rabbis, pastors, in full-page ads and stuff. So the Christians are very interesting. Statistically, though, if you look at the evangelicals, the next generation, the younger evangelical Christians, number one is they're not as religious as their parents, and they're not necessarily as focused on Israel as their parents. Pastor Hagee is getting older, and I know his daughter, I've met her before, and you're not necessarily going to have that same leadership. So it's very worrisome that was kind of a group. Now, I'm not going to get into why they support it. There's a whole theological conversation to be had. But we have few friends, so it's not, we have to. But yeah, there's no doubt we have to do that. There are a lot of people trying to make that case. But it's hard because America is so polarized into right and left. It's very hard to get that messaging out. But there are definitely people, calling it for what it is. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, who's winning?
Stand up, project.
Who's winning the war?
That's an excellent question. Everyone hear that? The question is who is winning the war? So we hope that we are, right? And that's the way certainly it seems. I think Hamas badly judged our reaction. I also don't think they necessarily thought they were going to be as successful as they were. And to have 230, 240 hostages. What Israel has done now is basically told Gazans, to stay out of the conflict, go to a certain place, and they've split Gaza in two, and now they're going to kind of converge. And it's very difficult because there's this massive tunnel network, And when I say tunnel, I'm not talking about like when you go out in the snow and you build a little snow tunnel, These tunnels are unbelievably equipped. There's a massive amount of medicine, food, gas. There's a lot of stories which are very true about, they're crying for gas in these hospitals. Meanwhile, Hamas has a ton of this gas put away. So it's very complicated. One of the other complicated pieces of what's happening here is that the hostages are being held by multiple groups. We think of Hamas as like, okay, everyone's Hamas, you're a card-carrying member. They're not as organized as a real army. And one of the questions came up, I don't know if you saw, there was a young chayelet, a woman soldier that was freed, right? And the question was, well, how did that happen, right? So when you dig down and you have some conversations, you find out that there were a lot of people that ran over the border and someone grabbed them and put it in their house. It wasn't even the official kind of kidnapping Hamas network, and they got intelligent and they were able to free her. So we believe that we're being very successful in doing what we need to do, but at the end of the day, it's so unprecedented to have this many hostages, and obviously they want to get them out alive and safe. And on the other hand, you have the safety of your soldiers. The safety of your soldiers. So we think we're winning, but if you win in the end and you lose some of the hostages and you lose some of your soldiers, it's hard to say that. And then the question is, what happens after this is all over? You have so many people. Okay, now President Obama spoke, I think, at his foundation today that now is the time for the two-state solution. And there's going to be all kinds of pressure. One of the things I say about Biden, right, is I do believe absolutely that he has taken a lot of the right steps, but there may be a pound of flesh to pay later for that, right, which is Israel being pushed into the areas that don't really work. So, let's say you do create a two-state solution, right? So what happens when that other state now starts lobbying everything over, and they it's not so tenable. People just, it's like a PR thing. Two-state. No one really even knows what that means. So the question is, you have to define winning, right? First and foremost, to try and get them out alive and safe, and then to figure out how not to have to do this every couple of years.
I'll say one more.
Whoop, stand up and loud.
You can't underestimate the 7 or 8 military.
7 or 8 military?
In the world.
Best.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I've spent one piece of social media, or anti-social media, it's sometimes called as Reddit. I spent a lot of time on r/Israel-Palestine. In fact, I hate to be that guy who's like, I was there before, it was cool, but I started learning about this and obsessing over it years before. And I was there when this whole thing went down. And r/Israel-Palestine is actually an oasis on Reddit of pro-Israel sentiment. People always complain there that this place skews heavily Israel, pro-Israel. Usually the pro-Palestine people will come, this is a bunch of Hasbara bull, and this is an echo chamber, and they'll get out of there really quick. I've learned a lot about this conflict from there, and there are people from the Arab world who come on there and try to argue. One thing I found is that they're not really after truth. They're after their in-group and defending and everything is friendly until you don't agree with them.
Right.
And then it's just subtle insults, it's digs at your character, it's using any little weakness you admitted against you. And finally they get nasty, they get frustrated.
See LinkedIn.
It's and the one thing I've learned an awful lot about Arab culture and Arab values, and one thing is that blame must always be directed outward. It's this tight Habibi culture where the peace must be kept at home no matter what. Everybody is so close and tight-knit with each other. But to keep that harmony and peace, anything that goes wrong must be blamed on an outside source. It's a part of the culture.
Yeah, and for sure it's part of culture. You have to realize that every single Arab country, whoever rules that country is terrified of the street. They're terrified of the street. And so much of what goes on is they just have to figure out how to stay in power. Jordan, it's a miracle that Jordan is still, standing, to a certain extent. And so for a lot of them, it's all, they just, I'd love to take a stance or whatever it is. They may say behind closed doors, but it's irrelevant. They've got to play a certain role. And it's really hard. And I think also the Palestinians in general, there really isn't leadership on the other side. And that's been you have the president of the PA who wrote his thesis on Holocaust denial, who is, I think it's 14 years of a 4-year term, and so, I'm sorry?
Yeah, 14 years.
14 years, right? So you don't really have people that care about their people. And that's really, and tremendous corruption, and that's the issue. Who do you even talk to? Who do you, here's
But here's the thing, but in the face of outsiders, they will stand because it's perfect solidarity. It's two brothers against a cousin, two cousins against a stranger. So they may disagree and want to kill each other amongst themselves, but to an ajnab, to a foreigner, no, we're all in lockstep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the percent of united front. No, you cannot get through it arguing.
For sure. David?
I want to just push back on something you said earlier about the image, the losing the social media battle, the fact that fighting anti-Semitism. I think this war is a demonstration that is never going to be a winning strategy. That we are, aside from the fact that the platforms themselves are against us, the numbers are also against us, and there's no amount of, I think it's important, it's about axiomatic hate.
Yeah.
That the axiom is that Israel is evil.
Yeah.
And so when you have axioms, you can't fight them with facts. You can't fight them with truth. So I think that Israel's position has to be to just forge ahead, to do everything it needs to do. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with the embassy in Jerusalem, the same thing with the Golan Heights, and frankly, if we, officially annex Judea and Samaria, I think the same would be true. There's a human cry and then nothing.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, no one cares about Palestinians. They just want to use it as an attack on Israel. Israel needs to ignore public opinion because it's getting attacked. Will defend Israel if it's strategically valuable for it to, regardless of what Israel does.
Yeah.
It's worked a lot of countries that do heinous things to their people.
Yeah.
Israel doesn't.
Correct.
But we do something, if Israel is valuable to America will still support it. When it's not, good luck to it. Good luck to Israel.
All right. Yeah, I actually agree with that. And I think for the first time you're really seeing Israel be like, we don't really care, et cetera. For me, my perspective is, and as the head of Asia Torah, I'll tell you this, what hurts me more than anything in the world is to see Jewish kids taking the other side. If any of you go on If Not Now, or you look at any of this stuff, it breaks your heart, and I beat myself up over it that we haven't gotten to these kids, we haven't made our case, So for me, a lot of this social media stuff is how do we talk to the Jews, The rest of the world, I'm no offense, they can go to heck, but
get them off social media.
Yeah.
Every time you use social media, you validate it and you bring more and more people. You make it more valuable by being there. I think the only way we're going to start winning the internet war is to get ourselves off of social media and create something else that we control, that we can get people to go to.
Yeah. One and then two.
First of all, the scariest thing that I don't think anyone's really talking about, even in this room, is that when you read from the hostages that they released, and you read that the Hamas has been preparing for a long time, that each group of 5 hostages, they have a paramedic, they have a doctor, they have the hygiene, they have everything. And if you think about the fact that they have 200 hostages, they have all this plan, even let's say people who are observing a kosher, whatever food they get the cheese, the bread. And the scariest thing is that they have outsmarted us. They've outsmarted Israel. I don't, with this BB thing and blame, it doesn't matter about the blame anymore. Why? Because it's happened. Number 2, where are we? No matter what your Jewish background is, where are we going to be in 5 or 10 years? You have, when you look at these pro-Palestinians, now first of all, I agree, whether you like it or not, the good Palestinians and the good Arabs that are at peace with the Jews. I mean, you do read how there's people making their restaurants kosher to help the soldiers. So there are some good. Maybe not everyone. Okay, but there's some good Palestinians, good Arabs. But what I'm trying to state is that since they've been planning this for years, and when you look at the New York City, and you see these Caucasian women my age, 20s, 30s, and they're for the people who've killed. In or 10 years, where are we going to be?
In Israel.
No, we may be in Israel, but since Hamas has been smart enough to get this done, what I'm saying is I'm scared for everybody, because since they've outsmarted us, they prepared for this a long time. I'm scared whether you're Orthodox, I'm scared for everybody, but why? Because since they got it done, where we can be in 5 or 10 years, that's the scary part.
Hey, look, yeah, there's no doubt that we have to figure out exactly where we're going. Look, many people have said this to me, many people, and this is a very common conversation amongst Jews everywhere, which is people feel the future is Israel, and maybe it's time to start thinking more strongly about that. I have someone I'm very close to from the Syrian community. He's in the middle of building a very big house in Deal, and we're very close. And he said to me, and he actually had bought 2 homes in Israel, and he told me, he said that, he goes, for the first time I'm rethinking, I'm building this big house here. He goes, all my Syrian friends now are like, oh, you bought in Israel, what's, like, and I mean, the Syrian community, I wasn't expecting that from him and that conversation. And that's a conversation we're having. Like, I very openly tell my kids, I don't know how long of a future we're going to have here. It's not that there aren't people in America that don't care about us, but the overall, it's a story we've seen many, many, many times. And for a Jew, it's always about, when is too late going to happen? I tell a story. I was in the Vatican, went to meet Pope Francis a bunch of years ago, and the night before we went there, we were having dinner with, there was a cardinal there who had served in America, and he was telling us, he got up to speak, and usually the Catholics are very prepared. They have like written speeches and stuff. They're very careful about that. And they'll be drinking wine. This later. He got up to speak kind of off the cuff. And the cardinal said, and he was retired now, he was in Rome, and he said that he didn't understand the Jews till there was some kind of interfaith gathering, and he was paired off with like a rabbi in one of these conversations. And the rabbi said, he was a young rabbi said to him, he goes, I'll be honest with you, he says, when I see you, do you know what I think of? I think of, will you be there for me? And the cardinal says, what are you talking about? Of course I'll be there for you. And he goes, no, will you be there for me? He goes, no, when they come to get me, will you be there for me? And that's what the rabbi said to him. And this cardinal said, then he finally got the way a Jew thinks. Right? And it's 2,000 years of everywhere. I recently was speaking to someone from Spain. The guy is a government official, and he told me, as far as he's concerned, that the golden age of Spain ended when they threw the Jews out. They just shot themselves in the foot. But we see from history that they don't mind shooting themselves in the foot, and so that's a real question. The real question is our future. And I have to tell you, when you walk the streets of Israel and you see these young men, like I said, I tell this to everyone. To me, I'm a Mosheva boy, right? And I always quote when they were singing the Mishabeh for the Tzahal there, right? It was from Radon and Tebi, right? So Mosheva, we watch Radon and Tebi 50 times a summer, right? And there's one, right? Yeah, you're on going. And there's one point in there, where Yonatan Netanyahu, who's the only soldier killed, Bibi's brother. They're about to get on the plane, and of course the plane was hijacked to Uganda. It was an Air France plane, right? And he's like, you're probably wondering why we're going halfway around the world. It's not an El Al plane, it's an Air France, And he says, because Jews always save Jews. That's what we do. And the fact that you've got a 19, 20, 21-year-old in Israel, that if you have a problem, will get on a plane and show up and save you, no one else in the world has that. Literally, no one else has that. And I'll finish on this note, right? Because we have to wrap up for the main session. But I'll finish up on this one note. Some of you may know this story. But when we bombed the Iraqi nuclear power plant in 1981, and everyone condemned us for taking on Saddam Hussein, talk about crazy world, right? We were the reason there were no nukes in the Gulf War. And so they bomb it, and then Menachem Begin, right, who is just an amazing hero of the Jewish people, he's got to make an announcement and tell everyone what he did, right? So in 1981, there was a reunion of Holocaust survivors in Jerusalem. People that did not know that they survived the Holocaust. They came together. They were getting older. They came together, and they're sitting there at the Kotel, and Menachem Begin gets up and tells them that they sent 8 planes. The last plane, by the way, was Ilan Ramon. He was the youngest pilot on that mission, right?
By the way, he came out last.
He did. He was the most dangerous because he was last at number 8.
No family.
Yeah,
He said, I'll
he was
be
the
the last
youngest.
one to leave.
Yeah. So he basically says that, in the end, if someone says they're gonna attack or destroy the Jewish people, we're gonna take them seriously from here on in. And I think that's the bottom line. That's why we have to support Israel. And we have to think about our future in Israel. Thank you.